What is the opposite of a plot hole?
Get out of there!
We've got to get out of here and fast.
You two get out of here. Let's get out of here. We have to get out of here.
Not an inconsistency, but when a plot is so tangled up upon itself, it can't help but regurgitate itself, cluttering the narrative with so many callbacks and flashbacks and references that you can't help but think, wow, I saw all of this before a few minutes ago. And better, genre fiction wasn't always interested in continuity. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan was a sequel that referenced an old episode of the original series, following up on the fate of a one-off villain. This one choice, referencing an old villain, turned Khan into a one-off bad guy and into one of sci-fi's greatest villains.
I've heard you. And I wish to go on hurting you.
Even if it opened up a whole can of plot holes.
I never forget a face. Mr. Chekhov.
One of the more noteworthy ones, a big joke in the Star Trek community, how did Khan know who Chekhov was if Chekhov was introduced the season after Khan showed up? And the joke always is, oh, well, Chekhov was probably on the ship the whole time and just no one noticed him. And when Khan had used the bathroom one day, Chekhov was taking too long and Khan never let it go. He never got over it. You know, something dumb like that.
I never forget a face.
See, plot holes used to be these fun little things that nerds would pick up on, and only they would care about. Because no one watching Star Trek II probably cared about the events of Starseed, the episode where Khan first appeared. Hell, Simpsons even makes a joke with its famous Xena episode.
Whenever you notice something like that, a wizard did it.
I see, alright, yes. But in episode AG4...
Wizard.
For Clavin out.
But modern audiences, maybe thanks to streaming, maybe thanks to accessibility to media, now are more acutely aware of continuity plots and plot points, etc., and when they're contradicted. And now, remembering plot points from 10, 20, 30, even 40 or 50 years ago has become a major component of modern storytelling. I was watching a recent video from fellow comics creator Linkara on The Three Jokers, which is a, I guess, major graphic novel from DC. I guess. It doesn't really fit in the continuity perfectly. It teases up this plot point referenced where the Joker apparently was not one person, but three people, as the name implies. But it was very strange how the plot resolved itself. It didn't totally make sense in the continuity up to this point. It came several years too late for it to matter to most people because the tease happened, I guess, 2016, and the Three Jokers comic came out 2020. But anyway, the comic really was focused on referencing past Joker stories, most notably The Killing Joke and Death in the Family. Barbara Gordon and Jason Todd are major characters, and their past with Jokers explained thoroughly throughout the story. There are many callbacks to past Joker narratives, such as the Laughing Fish storyline, which is one of my favorite Bronze Age Joker stories, personally. And this isn't something that DC hasn't done before. Jason Todd and Barbara Gordon both evolved dramatically thanks to encounters with the Joker. Barbara is paralyzed from the waist down and as a result has to retire from the role of Batgirl and become Oracle. Whereas Jason Todd, having been killed by the Joker, becomes the Red Hood after being revived due time shenanigan bullshit. No one stays dead in DC or Marvel. You know how it is. Both of these are explorations of how the plot continues past a certain event, how characters build off previous plot points. However, in Three Jokers, we're circling back to that origin point.
Belt up, gang. We're about to land. Belt up, gang. We're about to land. Belt up, gang. We're about to land. Belt up, gang. We're about to land.
Which isn't inherently a bad thing, but it's happening at the same time and overlapping with other references, made all the more complicated by what they continue to reference. While the comic focuses on Barbara and Jason's modern origin points, it also focuses on Batman's, with Joe Chill, the man who killed Batman's parents, becoming a major component in the story, with him dying slowly over the course of the narrative, and Bruce having to come to terms with the man who created him dying, especially considering that Joe Chill has remorse for his actions against the Wayne family. However, it's the end of the comic that I have the biggest issue with. You see, in the comic, we learn that Batman figured out who Joker was immediately. Within a week of meeting the Joker for the first time, he had already figured out Joker's actual identity, and had determined that in order to protect the Joker's ex-wife from ever being discovered, he would never reveal Joker's identity. And this is where things get complicated. You see, the Joker's wife is referenced in The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke contains several flashbacks to the Joker's origin, the one bad day that made him the Joker. The Joker thinks back consistently to the day where he had this pregnant wife who was tragically and senselessly killed. And this trauma makes him more vulnerable when he falls into the vat of chemicals, becoming the Joker. The idea that even a good man with one bad day can become something irredeemable. However, the Killing Joke doesn't just end with that flashback, and we're not supposed to take that at face value. See, the Joker has multiple memories that all contradict each other, leading up to the day when he became the Joker. It's a multiple choice backstory. The story we see in The Killing Joke is probably his own delusion, but in The Three Jokers, it canonizes an iteration of that past, because they keep the unreliable narrator element, but we see that the Joker was actually a very abusive, cruel man to his wife, and she ran away, faking her death in the process, which indicates Joker was never a good man. He was always terrible from the beginning. So it kind of shifts the point of The Killing Joke a little bit. And again, it's a retcon, and we know it wasn't a real event that happened because the Joker tells us it's a fake memory in The Killing Joke, but it's weird. They want to reference The Killing Joke, but also retcon it, and it feels disrespectful to Alan Moore's intention. Then again, Alan Moore also disrespects his intentions in hindsight, so maybe that's fitting. I don't know. And yeah, The Three Jokers does reference many Joker stories throughout the last 80 years. The design of the big bad Joker version, it's a reference to Joker's very first appearance in Batman #1, as a reference to the Laughing Fish. And the idea is just you going, when reading it, oh hey, I recognize that, that's a reference I know. And it feels very artificial. And offering Bruce closure about the death of his parents in the process of it all, it feels very odd. Linkara went on to describe the book as essentially continuity cannibalism.
Oh boy, now we can add more lore! We can connect it to the super popular story again! It's like all the retcons to the monitors we've talked about. It's not about telling the next chapter, but new lore, and connecting it to major stories of the past. The franchise eating itself instead of trying to produce something new. You get your nostalgia hit from seeing the thing you recognize, and you're lucky if it actually adds anything to it.
Which got me thinking, what else is continuity cannibalism, and how did we get here?
C-3PO and R2-D2 showed up, and I clapped!
I clapped when I saw them too!
I clapped because I know Star Wars!
I know what that is!
Continuity in geek spaces used to be something fun, as I said before, something that helped audiences feel a sense of reward for following a story over a course of time. However, I think around the time that the Star Wars prequels came out, continuity became a massive point of discussion.
We go back to Yavin 4. Remember the Rebel base?
I clapped when I saw it.
I clapped when I saw Darth Vader.
I mean, no one talked about the Zelda timeline before the internet got its hands on it. No one really talked about how these different games fit together in a chronological narrative. It was just, oh, each game is its own thing, have fun with it. But things changed with the Star Wars prequels, in part because it coincided with the popularity of the internet, it being affordable, accessible, widespread, but also it was a time when Star Wars fans had to reconcile all this new information with the old information. How does Anakin being a kid piece together with what we knew about Star Wars before? How does the lore about Jedi refusing to train anyone older than the age of 2 reconcile with what we knew about before? You know, there were these new components and plot elements that we now had to go, okay, well, how does this square away with what the books have been saying? Or what the previous films have been saying? I mean, now we know how it squares away, but this was a new experience at the time. There are many points in the expanded universe, for example, where they started touching upon what happened in the Clone Wars, or saying Palpatine never saw a sentient droid army. Well, apparently that's not the case, because he did see one in the prequel, so how do we square that away?
For years, George Lucas had more or less stayed in the background, letting the expanded universe pretty much grow all on its own with the occasional veto or addition here or there, but now Lucas was stepping into the ring again, with 3 all-new movies. It had always been understood that at the end of the day, Lucas was the primary storyteller. His stories trumped everything else. That meant shit was about to get messy.
Are you allowed to love? Thought that was forbidden for a Jedi.
Attachment is forbidden.
Oh fuck. There were a lot of little issues where writers had unintentionally bumped up against the prequel era along the way, and The result was a wave of retcons that made authors and editors scramble around to try and find a way to make things fit as the new movies dictated they should.
There were certain elements of canon that were no longer perfectly fitted in with what we knew with the rise of the prequels.
There you will learn from Yoda, the Jedi Master who instructed me.
When in actuality it was Qui-Gon Jinn. Other things were more frustrating, like where did Obi-Wan come from? For a while it was Coruscant. But then Lucas, after watching Jon Stewart one night, decided that
he comes from the planet Stujon.
And so we had to rewrite a few things, add new context. But that began a problem, because now we're referencing really old stuff. We're going back to the old films and comparing it to new films. And as a result, that showed people, I guess, online that there was an interest in it. It created communities around trying to figure out how everything pieced together. And I guess film studios saw that and went, well, I guess audiences really love when we talk about old movies and stuff and old plot points. Let's just keep that going. It created a feedback loop where the studios saw us obsessed with continuity and gave us more continuity to work with. Now the Exorcist sequels references Reagan's mom, you know, a character from a 50-year-old movie that no one really cared about. Or remembered, for that matter. We get an explanation as to why Han Solo has those dangling dice in the Millennium Falcon cockpit, even though I think 90% of people didn't see that one. I mean, I didn't even notice that. It was like such a minutia to the set that I didn't notice until Disney did close-up shots of the dangling dice. Did anyone really care about that? Was that ever something anyone talked about outside of, like, detail-oriented descriptions of the cockpit? Like, I don't know.
I clapped because I know Star Wars!
I know what that is!
I think all things requires balance. There's a balance between how much continuity we can reference versus what we don't. And I think it's important to look at how sequels used to be structured to see how odd modern sequels are. One thing I know about sequels is that they've always had lazy shortcuts to making them come around. Because in the old days, the trend used to be, if a movie's successful, the sequel will just try doing what the first film did and maybe change a few things around. Maybe take the formula that worked and recontextualize it, for example. Maybe if there's a romance story, the sequel has the side character get romanced. Good example of that, the movie Grumpy Old Men, a comedy from the 90s that focuses on two feuding older men fighting over a beautiful woman. Okay, so the sequel happens, and it's called Grumpier Old Men. Original name, I know. And now we see the other guy who didn't get the girl getting another girl. It's the same formula that worked the first time, only slightly less compelling. There's even, in the third act, a tragedy that happens that kind of puts everything into perspective for the characters, like in the first movie. And this isn't just for sequels. A lot of movies followed this formula. Die Hard, for example, became the go-to reference point in pitch meetings. How many action films are just Die Hard, but in something else? Even Die Hard 2 is Die Hard, but in an airport. I think Die Hard with a Vengeance, you know, the best Die Hard sequel, is the one that broke the convention the most by taking it from a confined location and making it more of a, I don't want to say globe-trotting, because it is really confined to the inner city, but more overarching and widespread of a crime story. And that's the thing Die Hard 4 and 5 just copied with Vengeance, making a larger, less contained structure, as opposed to the original film's tight focus on a singular building and all the action happening within that building. But as sequels went on, things changed. You'd see sequels start tying themselves more to the original film's plot points. One trend for a particularly long-running series was to ignore all the individual sequels between the first film and the most current sequel. A good example of this being Halloween 2018, which ignored the messy timeline previously and just honed right into the basics. However, this isn't necessarily a new trend, and in fact, horror specifically had been doing something like this for quite some time. It's just in 2018 we started noticing that trend. Good example of this, Nightmare on Elm Street. The first film focuses on Nancy Thompson and her friends dealing with Freddy Krueger, and it ends with Nancy surviving. Maybe, it's an ambiguous ending. Now, the second film is mostly disconnected from the first, save for a diary entry that appears halfway through from Nancy. We find her diary halfway through, and it offers context to stopping Freddy. But the third film is what I want to talk about. You see, the third film introduces a new set of characters who are all dealing with Freddy. And Freddy is making it look like they're trying to take a ride down Kermit's sewer slide, if you know what I'm saying. And they're all complaining about this man in their dreams trying to harm them, and this, that, and the third. And so a new doctor, a specialist in dreams, is brought in to help them. And what do you know? It's Nancy from the first film, who uses her experience from that first film to help a new generation of teens fight Freddy. It's a simple structure that allows us to see the world evolve. We see characters who we left off with on an ambiguous note come back. We see how they've grown. We see how they help each other. It's interesting. It's dynamic. It's fun. Films would do this or completely wrestle with their old concepts. Alien and Predator, great example of this, where each film didn't want to be too similar to the film before, didn't want to be too tied down by what happened, while also struggling not to be too different. And I think this continuity cannibalism can be seen perfectly with the structure of the Alien franchise. Or rather, a way to do it right. You see, Alien is a horror film, it's a haunted house film, but Aliens is an action film. Two of the greatest films of all time, but they follow very different plots, different plot structures, different character archetypes, etc. In the first Alien, Ripley's the only survivor, therefore there's not a lot of dangling threads Aliens had to pick up with. They could just do their own thing. But Aliens ends with many characters surviving. It's Ripley's happy ending, a complete arc for her character. But Alien 3, I guess to be simpler, says, you know what? Let's just take Ripley and put her in another adventure. So how do we get rid of these other characters? Oh, let's just kill them. See, that's the other problem too. A complete divorce from previous continuity is just as bad as auto-cannibalism with a franchise. The problem is Alien 3 has no interest in continuing Aliens plot, and so they just kill them and take Ripley into a totally divorced, totally unusual location. And then they just kill Ripley off, put a bow on everything to wrap this franchise up. Of course, Alien Resurrection happens, and they drag Ripley out of even death's door itself to keep things going. Aliens Resurrection is an odd film because it does end with that infamous newborn scene, but for the most part, it does feel like a cheap carbon copy of the original Aliens. I think in no small part thanks to Joss Whedon's script. In many ways, it feels like a rough draft of what he'd do with Firefly. Only unlike Firefly, Alien Resurrection sucks, and a lot of fans don't like it. It's really stupid. So how do we continue this? The sequels decided to take a totally different approach as well, in two directions. There's Prometheus, and there's the Alien vs. Predator franchise. Now AVP is just a fun ride, mashing up monsters that we hadn't seen previously together. And the Predator did include that little Easter egg with the xenomorph skull in the background, implying that the Predators did hunt aliens, essentially. But Prometheus takes the loose framework of the world to tell a completely different story within it. It references the space jockey, an ambiguous, vague entity that existed in the background of the original Alien. It's the alien that the first xenomorph bursts out of. It's a fossilized relic, indicating it's probably millions of years old. Covenant contradicts this, but I digress. So Ridley Scott took the idea of the space jockey, creating the engineer, this architect who creates humanity, and in turn, maybe helped create the xenomorphs? The first film's a little vague about that, but we do see murals of the xenos in the background, and we see the Deacon at the end, a proto-alien entity that is meant to be reminiscent of what was before. But then Covenant happened, and we got a lot of contradictions. We got an origin for the xenomorphs that completely contradicts what we saw in both Prometheus and in the first Alien film. The xenomorphs could not have been created within the last 20 years if there's a fossilized engineer having his chest burst open. So Ridley Scott didn't care about the plot issues. In fact, he directly said that AVP doesn't happen in this timeline. Because again, in AVP, we learned that xenomorphs were on Earth for thousands of years in the pyramid. So they can't be around for thousands of years if they were made 20 years before the first Alien film. It's completely contradictory. So what do we do with that? Well, a lot of fans just decided, well, it's probably a contingency of xenomorphs that David created in Covenant. It wasn't the whole thing, just a few. But then we got Alien Earth, which completely contradicts that whole thing. The new FX Alien series. Just says, it doesn't happen. Don't worry about it. But I want to focus right now on the other Disney Alien property, Alien Romulus. Alien Romulus is the first new Alien film to come out after the Disney acquisition of Fox. Fede Alvarez, the director, decided the best approach would be to do three things. Focus on an original cast of characters, much like how Prometheus and AVP moved away from the Ripley storyline, but also tie it in with the events of the first film and tie it into the events of Prometheus, all the dangling plot threads that weren't discussed in Covenant, but were hinted at. Romulus takes place between alien and aliens, creating a connective tissue that leads into aliens, at least thematically, with the heavier focus on action in the second half of the film and the focus on horror in the first half. But I think it works because Romulus is a really good movie that tells an original story about different characters interacting with a familiar horror. I mean, Weyland-Yutani is still the evil company behind everything, indicating that corporations are meddling where they shouldn't meddle and causing problems for ordinary people. Much like how in the first Alien film, it's space truckers being brought into a cosmic horror story thanks to the company's directives. But what's interesting is the concept of the black goo, an element from Prometheus that causes life to be generated, life to be created. And, well, they experiment with that and the xenomorph. And things go badly. Where I feel Romulus has its most interesting plot connection, though, is the final act, where the black goo gets mixed up with Dora the Explorer / Hawkgirl's pregnancy, and we get an ending that's actually reminiscent of the newborn scene from Alien Resurrection. In a bizarre way, Romulus takes a thematic cue from the most widely hated Alien film. Only now it's the engineer mixing with human DNA. And a little bit of xenomorph in there too. It creates a truly unique but familiar ending to a franchise that exists as a callback to one of the most hated scenes in Alien history. It recycles an idea effectively. It may not bring back old characters or plot points, but it brings back theme. You do have the resurrection bit with, Ian Holmes' character. That's probably the most overt reference that Romulus does, the most fan servicey ending. If you remove Ash from the story, or the Ash copy, whatever his name is, the movie feels a lot more distinct. This is unlike Doctor Who.
What?
Doctor Who tried a few things different. They had a female doctor, the black doctor, etc. But it seems now content to recycle every convention from the 10th Doctor's run, right down to the 10th Doctor and Rose, over and over again. We can't move past it. We're anchored to what was popular at the reboot era's peak, as opposed to telling new stories. Because new stories come with it a risk of rejection.
I know what that is!
But the weirdest example of this has to be Star Wars under Disney. See, when Disney bought Lucasfilm, they declared the last several years of expanded canon to be non-canon to the story they're about to tell. Which, look, I know people are upset by that, but the EU had covered centuries of timeline, and at this point had contradicted itself so many times that there was precious little room for Lucasfilm to build a narrative that was original. However, what Disney then did was they went to the EU and basically picked the stories they liked most and readapted them into their new timeline. Heir to the Empire is great, so let's bring back Thrawn. Dark Empire seemed popular, so let's have the Emperor come back in some body-hopping clone body scheme of some kind.
These books straight up bring the Emperor back from the dead and have him attempt to put his soul in the body of Leia's youngest child.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
And make it the last film of the series without any build-up, making it come out of nowhere. They love the idea of Han and Leia's kids on opposite sides of the Force fighting, so that's recreated with Kylo Ren and Rey, essentially. They're not siblings, but they might as well be. Well, until they're lovers, but that's a whole other story. What's interesting is the spin-offs that were most divorced from continuity were the most interesting. The Mandalorian, at first, felt very divided from the rest of Star Wars, telling its own unique story and a slot that hadn't been explored yet. Skeleton Crew has almost nothing to do with the rest of Star Wars, and it works well as a self-contained sci-fi story. And Andor, though it does lead directly to the events of Rogue One, and thus the events of the first Star Wars film itself, A New Hope, it tells a story that, in my opinion, enriches the Empire as this fascistic entity rather than takes away anything. It's not fighting for a space in the franchise, but rather tells a story about resisting evil, oppressive regimes and the ways that evil can permeate our society. But then you got stuff like Obi-Wan or the Book of Boba Fett, which is so slavishly devoted to what came before that it adds very little. It seems like it's just spinning its wheels, and these are the projects that fans wanted to see. I don't get why you want to see Obi-Wan between the prequels and the original trilogy. We know what he did. He waited on a desert planet. This adventure feels at once like fan service, sure, but it doesn't really offer us anything in the way of meaningful contributions to the lore. Then you got Ahsoka, a series that is divided between following up Ahsoka Tano's character arc, a character who appeared in spin-off material itself, as well as continuing the story of Star Wars Rebels, which itself is also a spin-off work.
Thanks, 3PO.
I know what that is!
So it's taking two spin-off works, both of which exist in relation to the main continuity, paying those narratives off on their own. The most interesting part of that is Baylan Skoll, an original character, an ex-Jedi who's become a mercenary, falling into darkness, but there's a sense of enigmatic honor about Baylan that makes him compelling, makes him unique.
It is an unfortunate evil, but speaks to a greater truth. One must destroy in order to create.
The fact we don't understand what Baylan is all about makes him more interesting to us, the audience. And it's something different, it's something new, mixed in with a lot of familiar stuff. And why is this happening? Well, I think it's a combination of laziness and fear. It's the fear that audiences only come to productions they recognize in some way. And it's not an invalid fear. People didn't show up, for example, to see the Thunderbolts or the Eternals. Even though the Thunderbolts is fantastic, and Eternals has its fans, it got a fraction of the box office revenue that Deadpool and Wolverine got. The reason why Robert Downey Jr. is back in the MCU as Doctor Doom is due to Disney recognizing, correctly, that people only show up when there's something familiar for them to grab onto. Does it suck? Yeah. But they're not wrong. But at the same time, sometimes the audience does show up. Look at Prometheus. The film has barely anything to do with Alien, yet audiences came to that more than they came to Alien Covenant. Look at this year in horror. Weapons and Sinners are both box office hits in a year without IP that are recognizable. They're not based on anything, they're wholly original ideas, even though Sinners does use Blade's costume department, but I digress. But the other side of this is laziness, because they're relying on tropes other creators made. And because of that, they don't have to make anything up themselves. They're building off what someone else built and not having to think that hard themselves. And again, it's the same reason why sequel formulas existed in the past. Don't think of a new concept, just recycle the old stuff. And that might work for you decently enough. But it isn't a new thing. It's a concept done differently and done before. It's a formula with familiar, recognizable imagery. It's such a pattern that it's become parodied. Case in point, the Scream series, in which every single sequel in it actively engages in the conversation with the concept of continuity and sequels itself. Scream 2 is in many ways a satire of the sequel, because the events of the first film are now a movie within a movie. So whenever they got flashed back to a scene from the first film, they can show a theatrical recreation of what happened and parody the idea of the true crime film or the sleazy horror film itself more succinctly by using footage that references the previous events as told through Hollywood, even if it's word for word what happened. But if you look at the film's plot, the relationship between Gale and Dewey, it's kind of in the same place it was last time. I mean, I know they have some history now, but it feels like it was cycling back to do the whole will they, won't they thing again. We have another Ghostface, two Ghostfaces again, they're killing people, and it's Billy Loomis's mom. Billy Loomis being the killer from the first film, now it's his mom. But the part where Scream 2 worked is Sydney. It focuses on her survivor's guilt, on how she processes what happened previously. Trauma is not something you just move on past. This falls into Scream 3, and I think it's, again, the best part of Scream 3 as well. The focus of Sydney's pain and her growing from the trauma of experiencing now 2 killings, now a third. And the third film ties back to everything else. Roman, the killer in this film, is the progenitor of the whole process. Everything's his fault. He started everything in motion. And so when they beat him, it feels very cathartic because it's like, oh, now we've beaten the origin point for everything. The evil can finally rest. We can finally move on. We've gone back to the beginning and conquered that initial origin point of pain. And it even puts Sydney off with Patrick Dempsey, an actor they can never get back for any of the sequels. Scream 4, I think, is the best of the sequels, since it feels distant enough from the original trilogy without losing its ties. It still has things we recognize and point back to, but it's not as slavishly devoted. And Scream 4's killer, Jill, has got to be one of the most disturbing of all the Ghostface killers, and I feel that movie gets better as we get further in time.
See, with you, the world just heard about what happened, but with us, they're gonna see it. It's gonna be a worldwide sensation.
That movie aged very well.
I don't need friends. I need fans.
Come Scream 5 and 6, well, both films open the door to a new era of characters that all anchor to what came before, the legacies. Sam Carpenter, the main character, her name of reference to John Carpenter itself, is the daughter of the first Ghostface, Billy Loomis. And so now she's tied in with this history in a way that's very different from Sidney. Again, the guilt, the fear, the association with terror and pain, and the motivations of anime Superman and Academy Award-winning actress are basically to inspire further entries in their favorite franchise, and they're avenged in the following film by a group of killers who reference every single individual Ghostface that has appeared previously. It is continuity circling around itself and making a parody of itself. And it works well with Scream, because they're aware of what they're doing. It's not simply fan bait, it's also kind of a discussion on how we tend to fetishize and hone in on what came before. Scream's always been a bit of a soap opera, and it has a referential message about media in the current day, but it works because it's self-aware enough. But there's no reason something like Star Trek Into Darkness need to bring Khan back into the story. Just like there's no reason to bring Blofeld back in the rebooted James Bond timeline. Other than, of course, to include something audiences would reference.
My name is Khan.
I know what that is!
Whereas Scream brought back the old Ghostface references to tie it thematically into the narrative, to add continuity, and to make fun of how people over-reference their own past. And this is because there's a refusal in Hollywood, a hesitance to tell original stories or new stories in a franchise to open the door up. Look at the James Bond films. Casino Royale and Skyfall are two of the most widely loved of the recent era of James Bond films. But the other three are so deeply entrenched with referencing what came before, it feels like they're kind of not really standalone films. Not like the old James Bond anyway, but they feel like episodes in a TV show that has to remind you of last week's episode every few minutes. And I think it all has to do with us on YouTube. Look at all the lore videos, all the endings explained articles that come out. We have so much we go back to in order to reference, and it's become an economy in and of itself. Endgame, I think, messed with a lot of people because everyone had to know what's Ant-Man's story, what's Thanos' Black Order all about. You know, all that. It's become so accepted that we don't even question it anymore. This is a new thing. We weren't always obsessed with the past like this, but now we are. Not just obsessed, but it's become a market referencing old things over and over and over again. Comics used to have these little asides, these asterisks saying, oh, hey, check out this issue for more details, what we're talking about in this panel right here. A quick cutaway comment. But now we don't just have those cutaway panels. We have 14-hour lore videos to catch you up to speed with every intricate detail. And we have spin-offs of those lore videos to get you focused on what has happened, as though knowing a bunch of plot points is a replacement for telling a good story. Hell, back in the 30s and 40s, you had sequels. You would forget what happened between films. They'd have a little flashback at the beginning, and then that was it. They'd move on, tell a new story.
Can you believe that bland and lovely brow conceived of Frankenstein? A monster created from cadavers out of rifled grave?
I do think it a shame, Mary, to end your story quite so suddenly.
That wasn't the end at all.
Bride of Frankenstein and Frankenstein, the original 1930 films, there's so many plot holes between the two of them, but no one cares because they each individually tell a great story. There's no sense of lore you need to establish, even though both films contradict each other repeatedly. There's a number of remakes that happened in the 80s that take deviations from what came before. The Thing, The Blob, The Fly, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. They're all remakes of what came before, but they divorce themselves enough from the original film to stand out. They're sci-fi horror movies first, and remakes almost second. An American Werewolf in London and The Howling both draw from The Wolfman. They're not in continuity, but they're in constant reference to those movies. But they do something different with the mythology that is discussed in the film. It's not slavishly devoted to things you're familiar with. It doesn't care about werewolf rules the same way that modern vampire films care about vampire rules. The landscape online has created a sense that we need to look for continuity plot holes and all this kind of stuff. The CinemaSins-esque criticism makes it impossible to have a character like Khan today show up and not remember that he never met Chekhov. We have created a time loop which we cannot escape from because we judge films based now on how much they reference continuity rather than allow them to tell new stories, to evolve and tell narratives on their own. How many people got angry at Superman for not obsessing over what came before, discussing how Superman compares to Man of Steel and this, that, and the third? So what's the solution? Tell original stories. Sinners, Weapons. These films are great because they tell original narratives divorced of any prior continuity needed. We reward creators for telling new ideas. There was a remake just recently, Nosferatu. It was not slavishly devoted to its original film, in fact, directly contradicting the design choices of the original Nosferatu. And it was fantastic. It was a great film. We should reward efforts like that over efforts to slavishly dangle continuity keys in front of our eyes to tell us, oh hey, watch this movie. You remember it from last time, right? Come back and pay us more money. No. Original properties. Celebrate those. Praise those. Focus on those. It's the only thing that can save our industry as we see it.
I know what that is!